Beware.
The Dark Side of Hollywood, Part 16, The Contract, written by the Prowler. In this next installment of The Dark Side of Hollywood, I bring you a man. As you can see, we find him sitting on the end of his couch, drinking from a glass of scotch. The sounds of laughter can be heard from the next room, from his young family, a wife and 2 children, a boy age 5 and a girl age 7. While you would think the man would be happy and in the next room enjoying time with his family, he is actually quite the opposite. He sits, staring off into the distance as he drinks from his glass, filled with melancholy and fear. As you can also see, the gentleman we are studying seems to be well off by the looks of his surroundings, and you would be correct in assuming that, for we are in the living room of rising movie star Damian Royce, and we find him with the world crashing down on his shoulders. First, we should probably start from the beginning of Damian's story. Born in 1932 on the coastal shores of Maine, he got into acting from a young age, thanks in part to his mother, who encouraged it greatly. He acted in town theater productions and continued his acting through high school and started to get noticed in the surrounding area. After high school, he had plans to travel to New York and enroll in acting school and try his luck on Broadway, but he was called to fight in Korea. After serving his time in the Army, he decided to head out to Hollywood. He had continued his acting while over in Korea whenever there was a stage show put on to entertain his fellow troops when there was downtime. In doing this, he had become friends with a private first class, Roger Harlow, who had a brother named Johnny, who so happened to be the fastest rising agent in Hollywood. Johnny Harlow, alongside his partner, Eddie Tremantle, a top Hollywood fixer and provider for their clients' needs, was the fastest rising firm in Hollywood. Everyone wanted their representation, even already established stars, and Rogers said he would make the introductions when they returned to the States. He was true to his word, and Damian was quickly taken on as a client. With the top agent in Hollywood, Damian had no problems finding work. First, a few TV shows to get his foot in the door, such as a few episodes of Dragnet, The Rifleman, and Peter Gunn. He was usually cast as the villain, with his bulky frame and dark features, such as his hair and eyes, and was getting a good reputation for it too, thanks in part to his good looks and his charm. Damian was nervous at first as being typecast and worried he would never get the chance to be a leading man. But Harlow came through once again and procured his young client the lead in an upcoming crime noir titled In the Dark, Even Angels Sometimes Kill, co-starring Jane Russell and William Holden. The film went on to receive moderate success and was considered one of the better films of the genre, turning Damian into a rising star. The role seemed to pour in after that, with his rugged good looks and acting ability, plus having the best agent in Hollywood. It seemed nothing could stop his rise. He did a few more noir films, then co-starred in one of the Oscar favorite films of the year, The Rose Bloomed in Winter, starring Julie Lamont and Julian Craven. He won the Golden Globe for Best New Star and was nominated for an Oscar for his role in The Rose Bloomed in Winter. His career was fully on the rise, becoming the top box office draw for Fontaine International Studios. To continue the momentum of his rapid rise, the studio gave him the lead role in their upcoming western, Sundown at Diablo River, co-starring the studio's top-rising female starlet, Frances Kirkwood, and Lee Van Cleef. To help push the picture to the press and public, the PR department of the studio put out a statement saying the young rising stars began dating during the film's production. The idea came directly from the ruthless mind of the head of the studio, Mr. Jack Fontaine, who we've covered in a previous episode. The thought was, if a rumor was leaked to the world that the two fastest rising stars in Hollywood fell in love on set, that it would drive ticket sales through the roof. Plus, it would help grow their stardom. This was all, however, just a publicity stunt that all the inside players knew about, except for the young starlet, Frances Kirkwood, and that's where the problem comes into play. Chalk it up to being young and naive, or maybe not being the brightest bulb in the chandelier. But young Frances actually fell in love with Damien. She believed the plan to actually be true, even though everyone who was involved tried explaining to her what was going on over and over again. Every event the couple was asked to attend, she fell more and more for him. She became obsessed, and even with her confusion and increasing aggressiveness, Damien tried to remain calm and understanding and remain friendly with her. I said earlier that it seemed there was nothing that could derail his meteoric rise, but on the night of October 12th, his star was almost extinguished. That was the night of the party the studio threw for the completion of production. The evening started out fine. The cast and crew were all in attendance, along with their families. Also a few members of the press, executives from the studio, and even other stars from the studio showed up. The booze started to flow, however, and Frances, after downing one too many Hollywood sunsets, her favorite drink, by the way, started to become boisterous and unruly. She grabbed Damien by the arm and dragged him in front of the members of the press who were there and announced they were to be married after the release of the picture. Damien's eyes widened, not believing what he had just heard. He smiled and went along with it, not wanting to blow their cover so close to the picture's release, and not wanting to embarrass her in front of everyone. But inside, he was crumbling from the stress of the situation. He began to drink heavily. He found a table in the corner to be alone with his thoughts. He didn't understand why this publicity stunt the studio forced on them wasn't going smoothly, and why Frances didn't understand that this relationship wasn't real. He also felt bad because he didn't want to hurt her feelings. They were at least friends, after all. Staring at his glass, he was interrupted, mid-intoxicated thought, by Frances. She yanked him up out of his seat and brought him over to the group of gentlemen who devised the PR stunt, including Mr. Fontaine. She became belligerent with them, saying she knew what they were doing and that everything better go through according to plan, or she'd expose this ruse and other shady things the studio was involved with, particularly concerning things involving Mr. Fontaine. Even in his drunkenness, Damien tried pulling her away from this conversation. He knew that you don't poke the bear. That is Mr. Fontaine. He has heard the stories of that man's temper, but as he pulled her away, she became more louder, pointing at the group of men, saying, "I'll expose you all. I'll expose all of it," for everyone in the party to hear, including the members of the press. Damien tried to get her to calm down and quiet her voice, but little did they know how furious Mr. Fontaine already was. Eddie Tremantle was at the party, not only because Damien was his client, but he had just been hired by the studio to become its top fixer. He walked over to the two to see if everything was okay. He looked at Damien and shook his head, then whispered the situation was not good and that he should probably drive Francis home. Damien agreed and got Francis into his car, and they drove off. There was only one problem. Damien was in no condition to drive, and after a few miles he lost control of his car and crashed into an electrical pole. Fortunately, someone from the party was following them. Unfortunately, it was a member of the press that also happened to be secretively on the studio's payroll. Eddie Tremantle was quickly called, and he arrived shortly after to assess the situation. Both of the young stars were still alive. Damien apologized to Francis before he was ushered into Tremantle's car and driven away by his assistant back to his home to sleep it off. Damien did not wake until the next morning, where he was greeted by his housekeeper, bringing him some coffee and the morning paper. He drank from the cup of coffee to wake himself up, then opened the paper. He completely lost his breath as he read the headline on the front page. Young star crashes car, promising actress Frances Kirkwood dead at 22. Damien couldn't believe what he was reading. She was fine when he left her side yesterday evening. Also, there was no mention of him being at the accident, or that it was her car, which confused him greatly. Just then he was interrupted by his housekeeper, saying he had visitors. It was his agent, Johnny Harlow, and Eddie Tremantle, and the head of the studio, Mr. Fontaine. Damien was in complete shock, asking what happened. What happened to Frances? She was fine when I was taken away. Little did Damien know, he was trapped. Trapped by this horrible situation, and trapped by his horrible employer. They told him the scene was completely cleaned up, and every trace pointing to him was removed. Mr. Tremantle got rid of his car and had an associate retrieve Frances's car from her home. They crashed it into the pole and placed her body inside her vehicle, making it seem she was alone and lost control of her car because of her intoxication. The time of the accident was also reported to have happened later, to give Damien the alibi of dropping her off at her home after the party, to account for the people seeing them leave together. So the story they concocted and fed to the member of the press who was there, and who was also on their payroll, was that Frances continued to drink heavily when she was dropped off back at her home, then decided to go for a drive and crashed her vehicle. There had been countless witnesses at the party to attest to how upset she was, and the story worked perfectly. In reality, Eddie Tremantle placed his hand over Miss Kirkwood's mouth, suffocating her in her front seat, her threats and words at the party sealing her fate. Mr. Fontaine then pulled out a lifetime contract and handed it to Damien to sign, and he was being blackmailed to do it. They told him if he didn't, they would reveal his part in the accident, that he was driving, that it was his car it actually happened in. Then a file of pictures was thrown in front of him, pictures taken from the member of the press that was there, showing the two of them knocked out in the front seat. Damien had no choice. He signed the contract, signing his life away in the process. He lost control of his career with the stroke of a pen. Mr. Fontaine now controlled his life. What kind of films he made, appearances he made, how much he made, and interviews he had to do. It was definitely rough at first. The only bright spot was him meeting and falling in love with his future wife, Brandy, on set of one of his pictures. She was in charge of hair and makeup. After they were married, they had 2 children and raised them in a lovely home in the Hollywood Hills. In the backdrop of their happiness, however, Damien was being worked to the bone. Movie after movie, appearance after appearance, the strain on him and his family being told what to do was taking its toll. As the years passed, it was becoming harder and harder. His career was still successful, but he was aging, and his box office numbers were starting to slip just a little. In private conversations with his wife, they talked about him retiring. The conversations would sometimes become strained when he told her it was impossible for him to retire. He wanted to. He wanted the same things as her, but he knew Fontaine would never let him go, and he couldn't tell his wife the truth why. Damien had flirted with the idea of retirement before, but was always shot down by his agent or Tremantle. But now he was aging, and his numbers were slipping. He thought maybe this time would work. There was just too much stress at this point. He was being pulled in every direction, and it was putting a strain on his marriage. He just wanted out of his contract and live in peace with his family. Back to the present. That's why we find him in his living room, with the stress and weight of the world seemingly on his shoulders, and the look of despair on his face. Harlow, Tremantle, and Mr. Fontaine just left his house. An argument ensued when he brought up retirement. They threatened him. They would tell his wife about his past, about the accident, and leak it all to the press, and ruin his career and family's name. Now he sits on the couch, lost and defeated. He gets up and goes into the next room and kisses his wife and children, looks into his wife's eyes, and says after today, everything is going to be all right again. He tells her he's going to go upstairs to take a shower. After an hour and not hearing from him, but still hearing the shower, she goes upstairs to check on him. The door is locked. She knocks on the door and asks if everything is okay. There's still no answer. She bangs louder and becomes frantic, shouting for him to answer. Still nothing. She runs down to the kitchen to get a knife and try to pry the door open. When she eventually does, all she can do is drop to her knees and scream. There before her eyes is Damien, hanging from the door of the shower. The blackmail in the contract, after years, became too much of a strain on him and his family. Lifetime contracts are supposed to bring wealth and security, unless you sign that contract on the dark side of Hollywood. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.